what are my confirmation biases? How do I learn? What do I really believe to be true? Where do I think the coach sits in this whole thing? What do I want for myself? How do I propose to learn over a long period of time? Like all these things, they need to really ramble with before they even start talking about, muscle fatigue properties in resistance training.
Welcome to the Upside Trend Podcast, your number one fitness and performance resource in Switzerland. Today, I have the huge honor of welcoming the 2007 CrossFit Games champion and founder of OPEX Fitness, James Fitzgerald. James, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sean. It's good to have you.
It's great to have you on. So I want to start way back. Can you talk about where you grew up, where you came from originally?
Yeah, Eastern Canada. It's a northern portion of Eastern Canada. It's the mainland portion of the most easterly province in Canada called Labrador. It's a part of Newfoundland and Labrador as a province. It was a small community called Wabush. On average, for my lifetime there, I think there's like 3,000 to 4,000 people that live there. And we were, besides Labrador City, which is a neighboring place, neighboring community, we were just really far away from the nearest location, kind of railway or flight or 8 to 10 hours driving kind of distance away from the next community. So yeah, it was a good place to grow up.
As far as you can remember, what kind of a child were you growing up?
As far as I can remember, yeah, I'm going to be 47 soon, and I'm never, I am. I guess I'm still surprised by the fact that I am remembering less and less. So all this could be completely false, but this is what I think. So I think I was curious. I think that if you're to judge my social character, I was a good kid. I think I played in the lane of what was accepted in as being civil, I guess. Mm-hmm. I thought that where I lived for first part of my life was, the entire ecosystem where I'm a little person. There's lots of big people around, and what the big people do must be the way that you do things. They're the ones that are in control and know what to do. But I thought my little ecosystem was the world, street hockey at nights and playing sports and really shitty winters and, hot summers with lots of flies for a couple of months. Yeah, I guess that gives you a little bit of perspective, I think, as I was as a kid.
Yeah, it does. You said, hockey. What other sports? Did you have any main sports growing up, or were you very broad at the beginning of your life in that regard?
I think it began as leisure activity, playing with your buddies, which was everything. And then it was whatever community sports that were offered. And being in Canada, hockey is hockey. And then in the summertime, kind of softball, soccer, perhaps. So those two at the beginning when you're, 4, 5, 6, I guess, years of age. And then as you enter into school, there was a pretty robust accessibility of a daily PE program and then a community program along with a school program for lots of opportunity for sport. So from, I guess age 8 till 18, I participated in everything, because there was lots of ability for that. Mm-hmm. There was always, sports dedicated to school times of the year. And I would do all of those. And at the same time, you're still participating in community sport, which would be volleyball, basketball, soccer, badminton, different forms of hockey, indoor, outdoor soccer, softball, etc. So lots of opportunity.
Do you remember your transition from the sports side to the fitness side, or when it really clicked for you that this is what you wanted to do as a job growing up?
Yeah. I can only look back on it now and say that when I was participating in all those sports, that was fitness for me. It was a physical expression for me. But then at 18, I had an injury in sport. And then in order to rehab myself back to a physical function, I discovered non-sport activity as physical expression to strengthen me for playing sport again.
Mhm.
And so it was that point at 18 where I discovered, because I was doing like, traditional strength and conditioning off ice or land kind of training since I was 13 or 14, in your bedroom, push-ups and pull-ups in the doorway, etc.
Mhm.
Um, but it was at 18 where I guess you could say I discovered fitness as a medium to try to strengthen myself to get back to homeostasis.
And how did you go from using that strength and conditioning as a rehab tool to making it your profession?
Yeah, well, it was how did I do that? It was just liking it. I don't know any other way to put language on it, but I'm experiencing it, and as I'm experiencing, I'm like, I really like what I'm experiencing, and so I want to know more about it. So that was the ignition that led that in. Is you're doing this stuff, and you're like, holy cow, and this leads to this, and I'm feeling good, and afterwards, with months and months of practicing that, I'm like, geez, I have a different level of capability and resilience than I did pre-injury. So I'm like, something to this. Um, I did a huge overcorrection for a number of years on that, but still, it was worthwhile. So I think I just knew right away, and that's how I jumped into it. I just kind of knew that I wanted to wrap my hands around all these questions I had around, why I get tired when I do exercise, and why that was the deepest curiosities, right? Why do people fatigue, and what are these biological constraints that not allow people to do 27 pull-ups in a row? Like, why does it stop? My brain says I want to do it and I can dream about it, but why am I not capable of doing it? Yeah. So
Going back to an earlier question about who you were as a child growing up, or as a younger person growing up, how much of that younger person's curiosity do you still have today in you?
oh, I think a lot, I think in it's on a continua or spectrum of intensity. So I think on certain times it's very, heightened, and then other times it's, so I think that over time I've balanced I think as I've aged, Sean, I have become, I guess, more curious, probably because I know my time is limited now. My physical existence is finite, and I think as you age, you get stronger and stronger realizations every morning about that. So therefore, these curiosities have to be balanced in that spectrum, if I'm making sense.
You alluded to a bit of an ebb and flow throughout your career in terms of interest and curiosity. How
Mm.
do you balance that out as a coach, as an educator, as a husband, as a father, in the sense that we always hear that we need a very precise routine throughout each and every single day, and that if we don't do XYZ every day, then we're missing the mark. So how do you find that balance on the macro more than the day to day, but over months or over years? How did you balance that out over time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I've learned over time to recognize the importance of what really matters to me, and that becomes my guiding light. So I think that I would believe that from my experiences for myself and helping others over a long period of time, using time as a measure of success on that, I think that when people really get in line with what matters to them and what really inspires them and challenges them, I think to your question on ebb and flow and balance, I don't think there's as much tension when things are aligned. So I think there's lots of conversation around, balance in life and work life, and to use your words, to you pulled over into it, ebb and flow. I think that generally occurs when individuals have not really found yet themselves, and they haven't really found what they know feels good for them and what they're okay with. And then when they find that, then there's no tension from other areas because they're aligned. And when you're aligned, you're not tired, you know. But people who have tension and grief and resentment and all these things around the plus and minus of the balance, I generally always see in consulting with them, I always see um, sometimes, Sean, a lack of confidence around what they really want to go after. You know, sometimes I'm sorry, I'm taking that further down into like rehabilitative tools to help people in this area. But
Go for it.
if I may, I think a lot. It's currently to today. I would say if I was to pick on a broad one that I'm seeing is people being afraid to own what they really think matters to them. Like they're afraid what other people are going to think about their decision to go after something, and it's sad. It's too bad because we need a lot of those people, to be really good at something and disciplined in one area. And funny thing is no one really gives a shit about it
To
in the end.
to use your words, what matters to you today?
Today, I fall back on these four words that I use, but I'm always hesitant to use those as placeholders for that answer. So I'm glad you asked the question. But teaching, learning, moving, and creating every day is fairly important to me. And as I say it, I still feel like I'm on solid ground when I say that. So, and they seem to most, I guess, that you would hear it simple words, but I do it for me because I use it as a mantra to kind of keep myself focused on what really matters. And it also allows me, because now that I mentioned earlier, I'm aging, and I have two young girls and a
How old are
wonderful
they?
wife relationship. My girls are 14 and 11,
Hmm.
and my wife Leanne and I have been together over 20 years now. And so when I say teaching, learning, moving, creating, I think it's always been that way. But I'm teaching my daughters about things. So people, some may think, well, you're an educator, so it would make sense that teaching is important to you. But I as times change, those things are still important to me. They're coming alive in other aspects of my life. Like learning, my form of learning many years ago is different than what it is today. So I do a tremendous amount of learning today in two main areas, which would be listening. So audio interviews or audio podcasts or audio books, and reading. Whereas 6 years ago, as an example, I traveled the globe every second weekend or third weekend, traveling to conferences and, being in place with people and being hands-on and listening to, six wizards of physiology and fitness or science. And movement every day is a priority for me. I'm moving differently, today is what I did 20 years ago, but I'm still moving. And there's lots inside that. And I like building things, creating things. I've gotten more into writing, writing little fitness fables and digging more into etymology and as I trying to be precise in my language and stuff. So I'm creating in that sense. So long-winded answer to your question on what's mattered to me. I still think those four pillars are what matters to me today, and those are my highest priorities for day to day.
How much does the writing piece play a role in your learning process as such? Because I find for myself, at least, that I haven't really understood what it is until I can, maybe convey it to someone else. And so I find that either writing or creating videos around what I learn helps me really assimilate it and maybe really put it out into the world as opposed to just having it in my head. Do you find that you follow that
Yes.
same process with the writing?
Yes, probably. Well, as you were saying it, I had a recognition that that's what I learned from it. So I do some writing as preparatory. So I write down a lot of things. So for example, I have a call every Tuesday morning to hundreds of coaches around the world, and as they progress through CCP,
Mhm.
and I spend 3 hours or so preparing for a 3 hour call. So I'm talking for 3 hours straight, basically. But 3 hours prior to it, I'm writing actual, like, repetitive notes and language of stuff that because I really only have to get on the call and answer questions. But I decide not to do that. I decide to get on and like speak about what is pertinent and how they can listen to me and take what I'm like throwing across to them, and they can put into their practice. And so yeah, I learn a lot by writing those stuff down, because I've done this I don't know 60 times, that like one of those morning lessons, right? Like last week was on the introduction to basic lifestyle guidelines, right? I've maybe taught that particular thing 100 times, let's say, but and I'm still writing prior to the lesson, so I'm refining the language and making it better, and so it sticks, and so everyone, when they get it, it's like, oh yeah, I've heard that many times before, but I didn't hear it that way. So I'm learning as I do that, Sean. The other thing that I was thinking about as you asked that question was, writing is not just a way for me to figure language, but when I write stuff down, it really sticks for me. So it's kind of this thing that I guess we've known for a long period of time, but journaling or allowing you to put stuff on paper, just for me, actually, just like it gets embedded when I do that. And I have like numerous numbers of a lineup of booklets. If you look inside of it, it's like gibberish, right? But I remember what's in there, because I've written down a program or a note on an individual, or like I did a course, a couple of weeks ago on um, uh, what was his name, Dr. Hollis, on Jung, metrics of gods and
Mhm.
versions of gods.
Yeah.
And I just took down, geez, I don't know, 20, 30 pages of notes. But that's embedded now, and I'm not going back to refer them every day. So anyways, the writing has, as I've gotten older, has certainly helped me on a different way than what it used to. So I'll just leave it at that.
Do you feel like had you used it more earlier in your career, it could have been a beneficial tool that you maybe underexploited? Do you recommend writing as a learning tool to coaches today?
Yeah, good question. For me, I don't think so, because I was so busy. And when you're a new coach, you're doing a lot. So you don't spend a lot of time. What you're creating is programs. So the writing that you're doing is like stuff for you and for your clients, right? It's your near vicinity.
Mhm.
So I would say maybe, but for me, no. I think it was the right timing. It's almost one of those things that I guess if I was to replay it, I would do it the exact same way, because I have enough experience now to get to a point where I can write and write eloquently and efficiently.
Mhm.
Whereas I think if I did a whole lot of writing from the beginning, it just would have been a whole bunch of garbage that I would look back and go, man, that was a whole lot of wasted time to refine what I'm now doing at 47. And I'm doing it just as good if I was to do a parallel universe, Inception kind of idea.
It's funny thinking about this. It almost seems like, and I think it is, the learning, the writing, the moving, all these things are skills, right? In and of
Yes.
themselves,
Yeah.
beyond what they can bring you towards. And so practicing them gets you better at them. But like you said, maybe you weren't as efficient as writing before, so it wouldn't have been as good a tool for you. How over the last, let's say, maybe the last decade, to take a arbitrary timestamp, how has your approach to coaching evolved? What are the main things that have maybe changed in that time?
Gosh, because it's such a long decade, a lot has happened since 2010, but um, not a lot, really. I would say the only thing has changed actually is the market's perception of fitness. So I would think that the only thing that has changed in regards to my coaching has been the ability to adapt and to kind of get at the base level in the consultation as to what really matters to people faster.
Mhm.
So I don't think I don't think the coaching has changed much. over a decade.
So maybe talk about the market in and of itself. How has that changed over the last decade?
Oh man, I don't know where to begin. Gosh, how do I make this short? We've moved, further and further towards this fantasy of physical expression. That's the short and dirty of it. We have now had 10 more years on top of a previous generation, and now reproduced humans that have this now embedded in them, of higher percentages of people that use fitness as a fix for a poor lifestyle. And from 2010 to 2020, there's been an exponential increase in information that is being shared on what people can do in regards to fitness. But I would say not as a just as fast of a rate down, but I think we're moving further and further away from objective truths in practice of fitness, which is kind of funny, right? You would think that we have this massive amount of information now that's available to anyone at any age. It has accessibility to YouTube or the internet, but it's not making any impact whatsoever on what physical expression is and what we have available to us as a human right, I believe, to physically express ourselves and to create increased resilience. So that's a shorter piece of what's happened in 10 years.
In your mind, what's missing to make that link between those underlying truths that we now know about and then what is actually going on in the fitness sphere?
Yeah. Just simple terms, I guess, would be awareness. Awareness. And I hesitate to say education because then it's very easy to blame education and the accessibility to it. And then when you say education, people just think one thing. It's like, public schools and access to it. It's like, no, it's just people becoming competent in awareness around fitness as a practice, right? We're so deep into the commercialized aspect of it that I use the example. We've made it. We're so entrenched and so deeply embedded to that belief, like way so far over there. I'm even having a hard time creating words as to what's the link to create change, because it's honestly, in my view anyways, it's not fixable, which is a whole other topic on if it's worthwhile as a form of something to wake up and try to rewrite and change. But I think that we're so far over to the concept of it, it being complex, that we don't see that, walking every day and lifting the odd heavy rock and carrying it is enough. Like it's, and I use that example because people are like, what? but there's muscle ups and there's diaphragmatic breathing and Tom Brady, and you see it's like they don't have the faculties to think about, did he just say walking and lifting some things every now and then is good for life? and yeah, that's it. so yeah, is that fixable? I don't think so. So what's the I think, forget your question, but what's the link to fix that? I'm hesitating because I don't actually think it's fixable on a generalized consensus of increasing awareness around that.
So I'll actually go in the direction that you alluded to. Why still take the time to educate ourselves as coaches, educate coaches to try and make that difference?
Yeah, well, you have to, I think as a coach or anyone, you have to figure out what your intentions are, so this is where, a lot of coaches get thwarted because they figure out that they're doing it to be popular or to be loved, right? They're like, I'm in this fitness thing to be popular. And then over time they say it over and over, like, I'm in this fitness thing to be popular. I'm going to get out of this fitness thing. So you got to figure out why you're doing it, you know? Are you doing it to heal yourself? Are you doing it to heal your own things? Are you doing it because someone told you should do it? Are you doing it because your friends were doing it? Try to figure that out. And then if you do see this little opening, where you're like, I believe in those things. Like I in my body and my emotions and deep within me, I feel that people as a whole should be educated on what they have access to in this physical experience, right? And I want to do things that help improve people's ideas and access to that physical expression, you know? And when you say that, you say it out loud, you're like, man, I feel really liberated by that. I'm not afraid to scream it at the top of a mountain. I'm not afraid to tell my family about it. I'm not afraid to tell everyone what my goals are for doing that. You probably could be aligned correctly. So back to your point on, is it worth it? It's probably going to be worth it because back to your initial question, you're probably correctly aligned. Your intentions are probably in the right place and you're not a bad actor. You're doing it with good intentions. And that's why I made the point of, like, you're just gonna have to figure out if it's worth it, if it's worth the punch. Like, it's a it's very um depending upon what you view as success, right? If you're like, well, I want to change the percentages of, take one simple number, right? I want to, by the year 2050, take the adult obese score percentage from 56% down to 21%. You know, and what I'm telling you is that this is my belief, that I think that's impossible. But if it inspires you to try to go after it, you just got to ask, like, is it worth the squeeze? And in the end, if you figure out, to what I think will happen is that it'll be 75% of adults will be obese by 2050, um, then you got to say, am I okay with just working on the people I worked around me and changed a few lives? And I really admire that. I think that long gone is that coach that is okay with just affecting like 50 to 100 people, really transform their minds and bodies. I think just as a signal as to what I think coaches should be focusing on more is not a globalization aspect or a social media impact. I think you should focus on 50 to 100 people that are really close to you physically, and take 20 to 30 years to transform those people. I think that's really admirable. I think if we focused on little things like that, um, you know, we may nudge something.
Did you always have that perspective on, let's say, the end game of maybe health and fitness as a whole, or did you maybe have a little bit more romantic view of it in your prior, maybe earlier coaching years?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, to use your words, a more of I guess you would call it a poetic truths in my head, um, a romantic version. Because I was doing a lot of things. I couldn't, stick my head up and kind of look around as to what's happening. But I think I got to thank the CCP and my experience in coaching other coaches, to reach my hands across the globe, to travel around the globe, to have access to all this information as to what's happening in China and Russia and Eastern Europe and all around the world, and Peru, and like
Mhm.
speak to all these people and be like, so what is life? Why are you doing this thing? The more and more time I spend in there, of course, I'm sticking my head further and further away from the doing things in fitness. So I get to then come back inside of my landscape and be like, I'm only making an impact to those, like, the people around me who are listening to the message that I want to speak about, So I've been very, open-minded to what I say and who's listening to me, and the definition of impact for that point on, you know, uh, how I see things.
How much of that self-awareness aspect is included in the CCP? How do you drive coaches to find really what really drives them, what gets them to wake up in the morning, and
Yeah.
that they can point that intention towards something that's one, meaningful for them, and
Mm.
again aligned with who they are?
Yeah. That's a softball question. I'm not sure if it was planted by someone who's just more recently been through CCP, but the newest version of CCP gets the coach to focus on themselves for the first couple of months. Um, and I always say it, even though this is like the third or fourth digital iteration of the course, I think the highest utopic model of the course is for us to be in person, and for us to be in person for a couple of months. And for those first 3 or 4 weeks, I would put them through some deep moral character self evaluations, right? Really heavy stuff for themselves, right? Not heavy as in like psychological counseling on the couch kind of heavy, but like, why are you really doing this? And as I'm speaking about that, John, I probably would get like a 30% dropout rate, like a buds training in the first 3 weeks, but they'd ring the bell like, I can't handle myself, so I gotta tap out. So the latest CCP, yeah, gets a coach to, before we even start talking about, what is resistance training and why you should do it for individuals, they get there with this idea like, I got to be really good with the self, like with who I am. What are my confirmation biases? How do I learn? What do I really believe to be true? Where do I think the coach sits in this whole thing? What do I want for myself? How do I propose to learn over a long period of time? Like all these things they need to really, like, ramble with before they even start talking about, muscle fatigue properties in resistance training. So yeah, we have that a lot more in the CCP now, because I want coaches to focus on self, before they focus on others, before they focus on the system, before they focus on the collective, because most coaches have good intentions today in why they're doing what they're doing, but it's all collective oriented. It's all like, oh, you're going to do the world a good thing and you're helping everyone. It's how all these companies virtue signal that, right? Oh, we're decreasing obesity, doing such good things, right? And 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 you don't even recognize, like, what do you think, right? How do you think? How old are you? What is your experience? So self is first, and then we start to talk over time around, you know, how do you initially help those right next to you?
So
How do you put them through an assessment to kind of give them, a layout as to what the plan should be?
so you said self and then other, obviously, because we're in
Others,
the people's business. Before anything else, we have
yeah,
to create relationships and nurture those relationships over
yeah,
time, and we're not dealing with robots, we're dealing with humans. They have emotions, they have a day-to-day life, they have stresses, all those things. um, how do you try to inform and educate coaches around that aspect of the coaching profession, beyond the sets and reps, beyond the, like you said, the muscle up, and those things that
yeah,
obviously are great, and that's what we love as well in our job. But again, before we can do any of those things, we need to be able to talk with and to another person. When you, going
yeah.
back to one of your prior points, listen to other people to know what they need, what they want. And so how do you try to help coaches with that aspect of coaching?
Yeah, well, we first do it with themselves. I want to go back to that. So they have to have a conversation with themselves first, right? That's their initial conversation. And when self-love becomes apparent in that conversation of acceptance and communication between, let's call it the conscious and unconscious in separate language, but just to say it's talking with themselves, right? When they get really good with that, then I think that's a good base support to start with, right? Then, honestly, Sean, it's through practice of consulting. And so even if it's a metaphorical hypothesis that I use, or analogies that I use, or avatars, or stories, or case studies, etc., I'll use that in the education so that coaches can be an outsider looking in, going, "Interesting that you asked that question. I never would have thought of asking that question." So, to your point, how do you create that? It's the only way through that is practice. It's practice of having actual consulting practice, right? Like, I think for the past 15 years, all the education has been on skills and exercise or marketing education. That's what all, but nowhere has, like, companies haven't been invested in for $500 million on behavior modification. No one wants to, invest in a company that's going to raise people's awareness of, like, how to make better decisions, So that's very, we got to be careful with that. We're giving over this agency to individuals, right? So what you're telling me is you're going to teach them how to figure things out for themselves. Like, yeah, oh, we can't do that. No, we gotta pile the money on. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent on that,
No,
but
it's not.
I think
I like that tangent. I'll allow me to cut you off because it is it's the worst business model possible to make people autonomous. But at the end of the day, I think we're doing a bigger service to ourselves, our clients, and everybody around them if we can empower them to at least understand enough that if they're left to their own for a certain amount of time, they can still, they're not just lost, and they can still keep moving forward, keep being who they are, and not, I think dependency, I guess, comes to mind. We don't want to create a dependency of the coach. So how do you maybe reconcile those two aspects of we
I don't.
we need to be in business.
I just write about it. I just write about it, Sean, and dream, and try to do it in my own practices with my girls and my wife, and those that are around me and close to me. That's how I try to reconcile that, because I don't, I'm a dreamer, but I'm also a realist. I know these coaches to leave a call and to go back and talk to someone and say, I really do believe that you have the ability to do this on your own over time, and I want to teach you the skills that allows you to get there. I think you may have a lot of clients leave. They can't handle the burden that comes with that. That's what that you're starting to get some ideas now. Maybe you recognize it, but when I say, like, we're so deeply entrenched, it's unfixable, this is what I mean. Like, we are now deeply embedded for generations on, oppressing individuals for their right to physical experiences by making it so complex. And when we speak of things like agency for them, even people on our side are like, no, 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 we can't do that. We can't do that because that gives up our power. We lose power then, right? Just think about that. How fucked up is that, right? That's severely fucked up of a pretty simple, pretty simple thing, like walking outside every day and lifting rocks. Like, it's that simple. And we've made it, it's ridiculously complex, ridiculously complex. And listen, I'm a part of the process, so I know that it's ridiculously complex. I'm inside of the complexity system, and that's just my way of trying to get people inside, hook and bait, to get them to, like, open their minds up to this autonomous version that we want to have of individuals, right? Yeah. Anyways.
Do you still work with clients one-on-one right now,
Yeah.
or so how do you try to impart that agency and that autonomy in those clients that you work with?
Yeah, well, I've learned over time to start that process a little earlier. That's the only thing that I would say in terms of it. And also recognize that probably everyone is on this different level of capability of moving towards this autonomy. which makes sense, right? Some people don't have the competencies or the faculties or even the awareness of the faculties, right? Like, as I said, it may take someone 9 months in consultation to teach them about self-confidence of doing this on their own. So it does take time, and that's where the coach comes in, right? We need these health and fitness advocates to be in that middle, just to be there when they like, am I really capable of doing this? And then next week you're like, yes, and like, get out there. And then 2 weeks later, am I really capable of doing this? You're like, yes, get out there. And if you just do that same thing for 9 months, you've done your job. That's your job as a health and fitness advocate, you know? So I have learned over time to, I guess, Sean, just see where they sit on this level of autonomy a little sooner. And so I could say this, I do more of this day to day than what I used to do, let's say 20 years ago. I would say more things like, now, what did you, indirectly, I would say, as a general consensus, what did you learn about that? And how are you going to take what you've learned there such that you don't need to have me explain that to you in the future, and that it's embedded now, so you use it as a focus of control for the future things that you do. So I now do more of those things of review, not to say, listen, I'm not going to answer that thing anymore, but more so to say, you do know that you do have that now, like that is yours now. So, and this is the reason why I like autonomy, as a side point, is it creates self-efficacy and self-responsibility over time, right? So when people move towards that, what a positive thing around that is that they start recognizing that's my shit. If I decide not to do this, or if I decide to go on a bender and eat Doritos and drink Labatt Light for 6 days in a row, that's my shit. That's not my coach's fault. That's my shit. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's the positive of what I've learned over time, Sean, to get that stuff earlier and to talk about those things so that they can find their way on their own, but also they start realizing this is on me. This is my stuff, right? And as challenging as that may be, it does actually, from what I hear, it's helpful that I've used that strategy over time. Clients are thankful for that. And I should make mention of that sometimes it takes them a long time. So I still get emails from clients from early aughts, like honestly, 15 plus years ago now, who will say, hey, thanks for that kick in the face. Or, when we parted ways and you said like this and had this disagreement, I really appreciate that. I can only see those things now. So sometimes it takes a long time for that to occur.
Still in the realm of coaching others, a notion that I've heard you speak about is detached caring, as in I care about the relationship that I have with my client, but I don't care about them per se. Why is that an important thing to understand for coaches?
Well, it's similar to, or I should say it's similar to the part of what we we're just talking about previously of autonomy, is that, remember, in the simple terms of it, like this is the starting point of a fitness relationship. If people are just listening in, my hands are apart. And then when you start a fitness relationship, it's like this, my hands are now together. And then what our belief is in the higher order store form of a fitness relationship is back to this, right? Which my hands are apart again, right? So that actually is, in the material world, a detachment, right? So you're detached because you don't know one another, and then you become attached because you want to learn from one another and change and grow to eventually detach again, because that's the highest order version of what we were talking about previously. So, but to preempt, what detached caring means, we use that for what we call the triangle of trust, which is a base support that all coaches should use as a background thinking to say, how do I continue to try to act in good character as a coach to try to gain the highest amount of trust with clients? And I mean back here because it has to come with good intentions. Like, you should trying to gain, just become a better human over time as a coach. And with that, you gain more trust from your clients. It's funny how the world works that way, but we gain trust when we become like quote unquote, on a scale, better humans, right? Better with ourselves and better with others around us. And the way you do that is through competency, consistency, and caring. Those are the three aspects of the triangle of trust that we ask coaches to use. Now, I preempted that so you can see that the reason why we even focus on caring is because we believe as people move through this form of caring over time in a relationship, you will build the highest amount of trust with one client and multiple clients. Because your ability to gain trust as a goal for you, just strengthens you as a person. Just to the really, really high levels, because there's lots of, there's a lot of truths you're punched with, inside of going after that practice, right? So on this start of caring, it moves from, you caring about the person, but what we mean about caring over time as that grows for you and that other person is you start recognizing that what caring means in that portion of the triangle is that you care a lot about the relationship, not the person as much. You see the difference in that, right? Because care for a client, we start to get into, dependency models and taking care of someone. And the word is really just hijacked in that place, right? So what we talk about is care for the relationship. So therefore, the highest order form, like the most grandiose concept in terms of caring for a relationship, should be one in which there's actually a broken level of care, meaning that you're apart, so, and you're apart. Why? Because you each are on your own way and you're surviving and you're navigating, you're actually helping other people. Right. So that's what's also embedded in that equation, Sean, previously, of autonomy. People just think, oh, they're on their own. They're in their garage, just working out on their own in the corner on the VersaClimber. How exciting is that? No. They're also teaching other people, right? They're teaching their families, right? And they're teaching those in their community. You see that? So autonomy comes with it also this, ability to teach others, because then it bleeds out, because that's how you should teach clients enough so that they can teach others. That's when you know that they've really reached that point. Sorry to go off of that, but that's what detached caring is that over time the relationship is so strong that they're on their own. So, which means it's detached.
From your experience, is that something that coaches, maybe experienced coaches, have a hard time considering if they've never come across that thought, the idea that they should feel comfortable kind of letting go of their clients a little bit? Because I guess you talked about dependency, right? So there is that, you do create a relationship with another human, and it does, from my experience, I've developed, friendships. I can call those the people that I've worked with for many years, that they're my friends. Now, do I invite them at my parties and stuff like that? Usually I don't. But there is that aspect of letting go that comes in with this. And so how much resistance have you seen to that in the years that you've coached coaches?
Well, resistance on behalf of the fitness landscape, tremendous resistance to that concept. As I said, because it dissolves the entire system. Because what I'm actually talking about is the dissolution of these long-term dependent relationships. They're like, well, how are we going to make money? If they just think there's no one else to help. It's like, how am I going to help people? If you're saying we should get rid of them, it's like, have you ever worked with someone? Like, it takes a long time to teach them how to self-navigate, So there's I don't even know how to say it. There's just such tremendous resistance. Whatever a better word for tremendous 5x is, that's what the resistance is for the fitness landscape. For clients, it's also a resistance, but not as such a high level, because they deeply inside, I believe anyways, humans know that they have the potential for autonomy, right? Because they observe other things throughout their life as they grow and age and their brain grows, of being autonomous in other aspects of living, So they can easily, when you speak about it in fitness, they're like, yeah, it's hard for me to comprehend because I may have not have seen my parents go through it, or I don't know what you're talking about, but something is itching in there that I can kind of scratch that a little bit, right? But see, this is the thing. In order to get to the clients, you got to move through the coaches. So if there's tremendous resistance to the coaches believing in it, no clients are going to hear about it, you know? And ironically, there's percentages of all those people out there who don't need anyone, and no one wants to talk about them. It's like, why are they successful? You know why they're successful
Mm.
is because they're not making the fitness experience complex. They're just walking and lifting rocks and eating whole foods. That's it's like, it's like, geez, they must be problematic if they're not coming to see us. Like, no, actually, they're just doing everything that's needed to express themselves for their life. Anyways, yeah, so lots of resistance. And I think I think I'm not going to lay claim to that conversation. I think it's been spoken of a lot of times. But I just think it gets over time, just like my language on it, it'll just get pushed to the side, or my books will get burned, or they, no one will want to publish the concepts of it, or I'll look like a curmudgeon, more so than a visionary on that concept over time, you know. So lots of resistance for the autonomy story.
Moving forward, I've got two terms that I'd love you to define and then explain the relationship between
Mm.
those two. It's entropy and max potential.
Yeah, well, entropy, I'll explain it on a 101 level from my understanding and my faculties of it. Is it's a physics phenomenon of systems, basically set up, biological systems that are set up in the way we know it in fitness to break down on themselves, and that's natural order. Okay, so if you think about it as a human and like your human experience, and I didn't know you were asking those two together, but here how I'll tie it in is, all of us have an ability to express ourselves to a really high level. Okay, and I call that the search for your maximum physical potential over a lifetime. So at age 6 and at age 24 and at age 39 and at age 63, you still have a potential, right? You have, and we've observed this through, millions of years, and only really maybe discussed it more recently, but we can express these crazy things physically. And there's lots more that needs to go into that story of that expression, and how interesting it is, and what we do that leads to a better life, etc. But how these two things tie together is that when you work on optimizing and working towards your maximal physical potential, and I have to describe what MPP means more clearly afterwards, so people will think, oh, you got to go hard and go at it all the time. It's like, not really. I'm just saying that you have to continually strive towards something more and adjust around what you're currently capable of, challenging your physical capabilities, right? And there's a way about going about doing that in very small increments. And there will come a point over time where the resources that you have in place, because we've only had 100-year history of understanding how to live from 55 to 85, as fucked up as that sounds, we really have only 100 years in our existence. We've kind of like thought about this, like, how do we do it? How do we put 7 billion people from 55 to 85? It's like, oh, I don't know, medicine, agility training. So what happens at those who are listening in who are over 60 or 55, you'll be going like this right now, nodding your head, but no one wants to talk about that story, right? No one wants to discuss that story of like, what happens when my testosterone levels over a 15-year period like drop to almost a nothingness? What happens to the female over a period of 6 months that has estrogen levels that drop to zero in a very fast period of time? So let's move on beyond the questions of why and evolution and et cetera, and how to deal with that, and say, what do we need to do then on this maximum potential thing when you have no resources? So if your resources are falling away, and we know that to be true, and cells are dying, et cetera, then what do you do? And I'm giggling because, I'm going to have to contend with this, and I am currently now. Is like, what do you do? Well, what you do is you try to resist entropy, right? So you work against the eventual downward slide. You have to work against that. And so the way you work against that is a different story than the story that you had to try to work towards your max physical potential. Isn't that beautiful, right? That's such a beautiful concept in terms of living a really high quality life, I believe, is the going after physical potential for a long period of time until your resources are like, okay, buddy, you can keep trying, but you can't keep doing the same thing this way. You now have to work as hard as possible to not allow that slide to happen. So max physical potential is you searching for that, this truest challenging expression, and keep optimizing that, and say fuck you to mediocrity the whole time. And then on the other side, say, well, what do I need to do to resist this drop, right? So have goals of 2 times body weight deadlift for age 52 to 60. That's just a little example, right? It's like, okay, well, that's a lofty goal. You may not achieve it, but fuck, that's a fucking admirable way of looking at trying to say an FU to this essential natural order that occurs in systems just piling in on themselves.
How do you bring around that conversation with clients that maybe have been in their prime, in their maybe late 20s, 30s, into their 40s, feeling really good, PRs all the time, or just progressing, always just slowly moving forward? And like you said, you do get to a point, and it might not be one day, but over a period of time, where you realize that it's not what it used to be, and you're going to have to deal with that. So I can imagine from a psychological perspective, that's a pretty important part of that transition. So how do you help your clients get through that?
Yeah, well, it starts with you as a coach asking the questions of, like, how are they going to receive this idea? You got to ask that first before you even mention it. You got to say, how aware are they of the concept? What things am I breaking down in their thoughts and beliefs by me asking this question? So you got to be careful with just throwing that across the table. But I wouldn't hesitate to talk in your language as a whole to your market and those around you around these concepts of a satisfying, content life. Like, what is that? Just to kind of like just kind of throw it out there to tell people, like, it may not seem like I'm seriously talking to each of you about this, but I just want to let you know that I'm considering it in all that we do. Meaning little things like leave a little bit on the table every workout and physical experience you have. You shouldn't need warm-ups or cool downs if you're doing things appropriately. Little stuff is like, okay, this is based on consistency and not on performance, right? So I think talking about that kind of stuff there in language may get the feelers out there, so you could broach like a really powerful talk to someone who's like, I'm highly interested in this. I never thought about that. I'd love to be able to lunge down to my grandchildren when I'm 73. Yeah, you want to get to the ground when you're 73? You probably want to stop doing the stupid shit you're doing over the past 5 years. They'll quickly be like, man, I never considered that. So maybe, and then you can have this back and forth, Sean, which is going to happen, right? It's like, well, what proof do you have, that that's going to happen? And you just pull out, all different kinds of models. You're like, well, why aren't so many people at 70 today just like writing everything around, how good their knees are and how good their hips are. Those who have spent, 25 years doing really hard contractions around their pelvis and knees, why? Is because they're too embarrassed to say that they're doing stem cell therapy or they had replacements. It's embarrassing to discuss that and talk to others about it. And if you go this performance route, I mean, it's a very easy winning. It's a super easy argument to win. Let's just study, endurance athletes or American football players when they're 65, and let's get some data based upon them. And no one wants to discuss those things. So I think you got to be aware of what they're capable of hearing first, and then lay out this overall plan for what you would like to see for people. Last thing I would say on it, which I've helped, I don't know if anyone would pick up on it being a good thing to just raise questions without answers for people, but I would say things like, you enjoy working out, right? And the client generally is like, yeah, we love working out. And we understand this concept of work and rest, right? Otherwise we'd be in here like 9 days a week, right? They're, oh yeah, for sure. 3 times a week on average is great for me. And you're like, okay, well, you see the benefits of it, right? For health and get strong and be with your grandkids, et cetera, right? Like, yeah. So we're going to do it 3 times a week, right? Yeah. And we generally take how many weeks off a year? Like, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks. Okay. So would that be 50 weeks a year at 3 times a week? And client's like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. So you're doing 150 sessions a year then, correct? And the client's like, yeah, I guess, right? 50 times 3. What are you getting at? And you're like, okay, well, that means over a 10-year period, you're doing 1,500 sessions, right? And they're like, yeah, that's right. And then you say, well, then that means over a 50-year period, you're doing 7,500 sessions. Now they start putting things together, right? They're like, I'm 25, right? And they're proposing just this conceptual idea that I'm going to do this exercise thing forever, which I just said I'm going to do. But now that I'm saying it, I'm like, that's a lot of fucking sessions. They're like, mother of gosh, like, but they start thinking about these things, right? Like, yeah, I'm not going to stop this when I'm 30, right? Like, and the only way they get there is by you just going, just think about these things, right? Like, think about that. So is it possible you may do, and then they start thinking, it's possible that I may do 10,000 physical expression sessions in my lifetime, right? And then they can start, even at 25, you may not think they have the faculties to do it, but you've set the seed, right? You put the seed in place for them to start thinking about things like, I like walking out of here and just being able to do other things and play basketball. I kind of like coming out of here and looking down the road and being like, man, I want to, I don't want to be like my dad. I don't want to be an invalid, like he was at 68, right? They start like putting that stuff together. So anyways, that may help people.
Going back to your competitive career, out of everything that you've accomplished in your life so far, where does the victory, your victory of the 2007 CrossFit Games stand today?
Oh, in comparison to other things at the time, it was fairly low on the totem pole. But because of the growth of CrossFit and the culture over time, it seemingly became one of the biggest things. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, because at the time,
is that other people's perception of it or your perception of it?
Both. Yeah, both. Just through reflection and growth of certain things, you only in hindsight can look back and go, wow, that was kind of big, But at the time, it was like, it's like been competing for a couple of years online. This is an opportunity to get together and do it, except we're doing it in person with people. And then 2 years passed, 3 years passed. You're like, holy shit, like, I guess that was kind of big. And so then I partake in being like, yeah, it is kind of big, yeah. So but on that point, outside of just the recognition of the size of it, it was a great experience. I have so many positive things, and gosh, the traditional questions of, if you were to do it again, would it be the same way? And there's no doubt, if I had control over that, it'd be the exact same way. Learned so many things from it. It was a lot of fun.
What was your fondest memory from a CrossFit competition or event that you were a part of besides that victory of the games in '07?
Yeah, I would have to say that I can't really pin one, but because you asked the question, I'll think about it after our call a little bit more, because I think it's a good spot to contemplate. Um, but I do remember a number of times where I was just on my own, and I was just doing it because I wanted to push myself. Those would be, a collection of 1,000 times of those. Those are my fondest memories. No one knows. It's not live streamed. No one knows what I'm doing. I'm just like, I got the task and I'm focused and I'm strategizing and I'm trying to push myself beyond what my unconscious beliefs are saying, and I'm so focused that it's almost like an out of body experience when I'm doing it. Those are my fondest memories.
How much has the CrossFit idea, the philosophy in and of itself, how much has it had an impact on you and your view of fitness? Because for maybe those who don't know you and in your past, you were doing, fitness and strength and conditioning and all those things years before you found CrossFit. So
Mm-hmm.
in the grand scheme of things, how does CrossFit play into your view of fitness and health as a whole?
Yeah. Well, the definition of it changes over time, so it's hard to pinpoint. When I say CrossFit, what I mean based upon, but it's based upon how I see it, and how I saw it. It was a great new idea on work, a new way to organize work. That's the way that I would say it upgraded my perspective on the fitness experience. Um, yeah, I would leave it at that.
You've seen the sport of CrossFit grow and change over time. Can you kind of give us from your perspective, the overview of its evolution since 2007, since the first per se competition in the sport until today, and then maybe where you see it going in the future?
Yeah. Well, man, it's to be simple on it. I think it went analog to digital very quickly. That's the way to think about speed of change. I think the just popularity of it just has been exponential in rise. Participation, it's you've got to remember it's a new sport, so if you just have 30 people competing and then after 15 years you have 1 million, it's kind of a big deal. So you can imagine all the things that have changed since then. It's just more popular. We have optimal hierarchy and separation now, which is great. Like what being good really means is fairly clear. So we have an avatar being built, which is good. It's great for the sport. It's great for coaching. It's great for truths. you know you're 6'5" and 245 with long arms. Like, sure, you can do some push-up salt bite workouts, but you're never going to win a competition. Well, I should say, unless you're competing against other big people at the same body weight, there's a chance, but you get my point. So it's just been unbelievable in its growth. But I mean, I'm saying that because we're 2020, right? So if you asked me that question in 2050, what's been the growth of the sport, we probably would talk about it as a different tone, um, but and along that growth, it's which is tied in a little bit to where I see the future of it. I am hopeful that the future of it turns into an amateur style existence, and I think there's a couple of things pointing in that direction, and why. It's been a kind of a hidden secret that no one really likes to discuss, but we've recognized over time, in order to be really good at the sport, you need to do it full time. and there's probably like an 8 to 10 year career on getting in and getting it all done, and then having babies or doing other things afterwards. And it's kind of unspoken. No one really wants to like do a long-term study analysis to who stays in there and who's in there and why are they in there so long, et cetera. And why did that person leave? And why was it around that timeline? And why aren't they still trying to compete, et cetera? With that in mind, what are these people from 18 to 28 years of age doing during the day? They're not working. They're not doing a 9 to 5. So this unspoken thing will lead to hopefully a more amateur style future for the sport, which is it's globally governed, and it moves from a private institution, from an example of what a sport should be, to a global governance, and global governance, so that it turns it into what sport should be, which is athletes competing for commercial interests that bring large audiences. That's the definition of sport, right? Where it has this fine balance between entertainment and allowing people to express themselves physically. And that I'm hopeful that that's going to look like an Olympic sport over time, and that's what I'm a part of. That I'm moving it towards that direction, and I'm also helping just conversations outside of the Olympic sport for development, just to kind of ensure that coaches have a life, coaches have a life, the athletes have a life, by defining the sport, being honest around it, being honest around some of those unspoken topics too, of kicking the shit out of 14-year-olds and kicking the shit out of 55-year-olds, and the unspoken stuff on that in terms of health and what it means for sport, et cetera. But we're only in the initial starting points of that. So that's what I think the future would hold for the sport.
When you use the word amateur, does that go in the same direction as what I've heard Jason Kalipa say, that CrossFit is not for him, and for even maybe the best of the sports today, best in the sports today, it was an opportunity. It's an opportunity. It's not necessarily a career. Just like other professional sports, where you will maybe win enough to live a lifetime of not having to worry about your next paycheck, but in and of itself, it's not going to be, you're not going to have a 30-year career, a 40-year career. Is that in that same kind of ballpark?
Yeah, because there always enters in the it's just that, and I could be wrong on that, but you want to take a different parallel soccer, right? So if you're a young soccer player and you're good, maybe you move through the NCAA ranks, and maybe you stop after your second year because you get a pro contract, and you're like, listen, I'm making money and I'm playing this sport, and I'll do it till I'm 32 and stuff cash in the coffers. And that's a life. That's a life observed for 12 years. And I have enough money, and then I can move on and do some other things, with the money that I saved based upon that. Right. So that's called pro. Right. But remember, this is that the participation in our sport, there's not enough events, and the physical resources are not there on each individual person to compete 12 times a year to make enough money to last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So that's why I'm calling it amateur, is that there has to be organizations and systems set up to like just hand out money to these people that want to be amateur athletes as well as coaches, so that we can be entertaining for people, that they can come and watch it, and there's money made based upon that. So yeah, that's what I mean, based upon just the conversation. And I know how it can get incorrect in language, because people may see, oh, if you're making money, you're a pro. It's like, well, not really. So think about things like the US bobsleigh team, or Canadian bobsleigh team, right? It's like, no one knows who's on the team, and if you actually ask them like how much money they make, it'd be embarrassing actually to talk about. No one wants to talk about it, but they're amateur athletes, right? But why are they not pro athletes? Because they don't wake up every day and just like sit back and perform bobsleigh and make all that money that allows them to live and put food on the table, right? They also play in the CFL, or they're a real estate agent or whatever, why? Because they have to have that money to support their sporting thing. This is the nut to crack in our sport. You don't have time to do a 9 to 5. You can't do that. and listen, we've tried hard enough to do that. And guess what happens after 4 years? People just die. They're just like, listen, I'm fucking exhausted. I was in university for 4 years. Now I'm working for 3 years. I got nothing, I'm burnt out. So the talent pool will rise enough over time. You can see there's this 18 to 28-year-old who can spend 10 years going after it, making enough money, surviving, but being inside of the sport. I would hope in the future they get an opportunity for an Olympiad, right? They get to represent their country, maybe go to the Olympics, participate in the sport, and that's a pretty admirable thing in my opinion. And I think there will still be lots of opportunities for the let's call it privatized pro circuit of some of those options, right? Just so these athletes can show up and do some cool shit, make money and sign autographs and be okay. If they can recover on Monday, I'm all for that. But the current offering of that is not moving towards really cool 3-event things over a weekend. It's moving towards more and more towards bloodbaths, which means that you're gonna wear people out.
Like you said, it started, I guess, and we do have to make the distinction in CrossFit between the methodology of the philosophy and then the sport, because they are two different things. But like you said, when you competed in 07, you had so many events to compete in. I forget if it was a handful of events, and 3 events. And this year on the first day, they did those on steroids plus the events, on steroids plus some, and then they still did 3 extra days of competition after that. What's the limit going to be? What's the upper limit of volume over volume and intensity over a 4, 5, 6, 7 day period? Where is it going to stop before, like you said, maybe it's like an overcorrection at this point, because they just want to see how far we can take it, and maybe it's going to refine itself over time to something a little bit less maybe extreme, if that's the right word. How do you see that happening?
Yeah, well, it is admirable that we want to move that. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. It is admirable. We want to move human ability, whatnot. I think it'll be similar to maybe the history you'll see in 100-meter sprint, where over time, you'll reach your end stage of like wind, track surface, shoes, doping, training systems, nutrition, all that. And like we've had like a nice 50-year experience with that now, where it's like, oh, what can we do? So to your point is like, how do we make it more challenging? And I know what the counter argument to that would be, where it's like, well, CrossFit's different, it has loads and all these other things. Like, I know that, but just use this as a parallel story. Over time, we'll start recognizing that it'll reach its peak, which I think it's going to start to get to. And you're starting to see that because it's starting to weed out a whole ton of people, that the people who own the system will go, maybe we should rethink, the whole way as to how this is going to work, right? We're losing all these people, and now they hate us and resent us, and now they're just showing their ass online and making money, and they don't care about the weekend competition. And we're like, maybe we should do something different here. Is that, the only way to make it more entertaining is to make it more sacrificial, right? It's to eventually weed down to 1 or 2 people. And I think over time that will lose its thing. To your point, do you think we'll continue to in the next 20 years get to female deadlifting 500 pounds and then taking 5 seconds and then running a mile in 4:36? I don't know. Will we get 6,000 people participating to try to break the female score of 500 deadlift in under 5-minute mile in 20 years inside the sport? I don't know. So I think it'll move more towards just trying to sacrifice more and more people, and with heavier shit, more advanced shit, more complex shit, and more exciting shit. And I think it'll lose its zest because of that push towards that. Because you're going to drop the participants, and you're going to weed out a whole ton of people who are just like, well, it's only for a select few. Whereas I think if you move it towards, and I'm biased to this, right? But what my view would be is that they are less intense and less complex, and it allows more competition cycles throughout a year. So it allows people to go back to training and get really good at those events over a weekend, and then they can recover on Monday and go back to training on Tuesday, you know? But you see, that's not as sexy, right? It's like, yeah, but honestly, you just had a 3K row event as your first event. People are like, but that's not, we can't put that on ESPN. It's like, well, that's where you're going wrong. You're going down the route of like more loads, more complexity, more sacrifice, more suffering, why? Because it's entertaining. But what you're going to end up with is I think a decrease push admirably though towards taking the whole, taking everyone and raising them up in terms of standards of expression.
Yeah, so some kind of your tour where you have multiple competitions and maybe almost like a championship throughout the year, as opposed to that one competition that decides all. Would that
Yeah.
kind of be one of the, because it's true that, I mean, I was listening to Matt Fraser on a recent podcast, and he takes a month or two off CrossFit after the games, and then he literally screws his head on and trains for 10 months. And he doesn't go and see people. He just does his training. He texts his wife 10 minutes before getting home, so his meal is ready, recovery, sleep, all those things. And today, that is what it takes to be number one. And like you said, maybe over time, less and less people are going to be ready to say, okay, I'm going to make all those sacrifices to just for just that one thing. And obviously it's not putting down the importance of the CrossFit Games, because I know how important it is to everybody in the community and everybody's working towards this. But like you said, it is a lot of sacrifices for very few people actually getting there and getting something out of it.
Yep. That's exactly it. So we want to look at those stories. We'll use Tia as well as Matt and Rich as another example, and say, what are they doing? Like, why can't they be the model? And we can't stop and say, oh, they're just talented. It's like, no, what are they doing? You know what they're doing? They're doing what is principally observed in sports for 100 years, which is like, if you want to be really good at this, you got to take it seriously, and it's going to require a whole lot of volume, right? And instead, what we want to say is like, oh no, it's these other things. But you should, and I think it's a slap in the face to Matt and Tia as well to not say that. Like, they put a lot of hard work in, but it's a lot of smart hard work, right? That allows them to express correctly at the time where they need to, right? And then they get what they deserve, and they take full responsibility for that. So I would rather us talk about them that way as opposed to treat them as unicorns. We should look at them as like, well, that's what we should all be doing. Sauna out on your land, and taking 2 months off after, like, the best pathway forward in order for you to maximally optimize. But I'm also hesitant to say that's exactly what the path is, because Sean, I know coaches and athletes today actually can't survive if they don't, compete numerous times. Like, they need to do it to make some money, right? So you see, this is why I believe it has to work towards amateur, and has to work towards, as example, in Kentucky needs to have an organization that has all this funding, no matter where it comes from, private groups or government or whatever, is working towards 75 athletes that are their athletes. That's Kentucky's athletes, right? And they're housed and given food, and they have 3 facilities in the state where they go and train full time, and they wake up and they're not like, oh, I got to get to work on time. It's like, no, you're going to go train in an hour, to do these things, right? And you can see that's so hard to like comprehend, because of where we currently sit and how much the private institutions have the commercial interest wrapped around that. These athletes are mostly getting exhausted because there's no pathway or security for them. So that's why I talk about it as an amateur way.
James, it's been an absolute pleasure exchanging with you today. I have one closing question, and that is, what do you want to be remembered for?
I don't really. I also, I don't want to be remembered for much. I probably, because even when I'm gone, I won't be able to, sit around in the joy of looking at how I'm remembered. Yeah, that's that ties into the deep, I guess, deeper philosophical question I've thought about of legacy. And I kind of think what I'm showing signs of currently, day by day and week by week, is that I probably will feel good in my own thoughts and mind if I kind of move further and further away from the connection to anything, and not even, and no one knows where any of the things that I came up with in my existence came from. They're just principle based, and yeah, kind of like Homer moving into the bushes. That meme where he just falls back into the bushes. I think that's, so. I guess in short terms, I don't want to be remembered.
James, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.